Hi, and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today we're going to talk about the princes in the tower. Usually it's just me, but today I have my friend Char here with me. Hi, Char.
Hi.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Today we're going to talk about the short lives of the princes in the tower.
Yay.
There has recently been some talk of these princes. A will was found that was drawn up 33 years after the princes went missing. And the will belonged to Mrs. Margaret Chapel, who is the sister of a man who confessed to murdering the princes on the orders of his boss, King Richard III, James Tyrrell. People
Those Games of Thrones.
People question this confession. Some people think it was a frame job. Some people think it was a Tyrell thing and he just blamed Richard, said, my boss told me to do it. But nobody really knows what happened. But it's alarming that this woman had the prince's chain of office. It does seem to imply that the Tyrells did have something to do with their death. The question is, did Richard III order his nephews dead? Or was it someone else that he was working for? But this evidence does make him look a bit guilty, the uncle.
Most uncles are guilty.
The
Especially back
princes
then.
were born in 1470 and 1473. Prince Edward and Prince Richard. One named after their father, and one named after their father's brother, their uncle Richard. Their father was King Edward IV of England, and their mother was Queen Elizabeth Woodville, and she had been a scandalous choice. And all that drama's in her episode, but a lot of people weren't thrilled with this choice for the queen. The king and queen had started their family with 3 girls, and while their 3 girls were loved by their father, Princess Elizabeth, Princess Mary, and Princess Cecily, they weren't great heirs because they were female. Someone was like, oh, lame, this lame queen gave us 3 lame princesses.
Popping out boys, you're screwed, and if you're a girl, you're screwed if you're in a monarch, you know?
Yeah. Prince Edward, the elder of the brothers, was born in Westminster Abbey, while his mother and sisters were staying safe, while the king had been apprehended and was being held captive by his cousin and his brother. His cousin and his brother had rebelled against the king. They had won. They'd taken the king hostage. The queen and her daughters, the queen's super pregnant. She runs to Westminster Abbey for sanctuary.
Okay.
She's not sure if they're going to kill her or kill her husband. She doesn't know.
Okay, so why are we running? Like, is there an
Because
uprising?
her husband is the king,
Okay.
and he has just been captured by his brother and his cousin, who are trying
Oh,
to
okay,
depose him.
so there's like a coup going on.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're trying to convince Parliament to side with them over the king. And Queen Elizabeth doesn't know which way it's going to go. So she's super
Um,
pregnant. She has 3 little girls, and she runs from the palace to Westminster Abbey on foot, a little bit by boat, but mostly on foot. And she gets to the Abbey. And she's like, help, they might try and kill us. And she's just going to wait there until they figure out what to do with her husband.
okay.
Her husband's either going to save her or she's going to stay here a long time. So Prince Edward was born in Westminster Abbey during this time. Their first boy.
Okay.
And the cousin and the brother of the king were trying to get Parliament to throw this king away. Like, look, he just has girls. He's no good. Let's get rid of him. He's lame. But then God gave him this boy. And so Parliament was like, let the king go. Obviously, this is the God saying that he's on King Edward's side, or he wouldn't have given him a boy.
Sure.
That's the way they thought back then.
Why not?
And there was even some talk about how they were going to try and depose the king. His mother was saying that she would say that he was a bastard, that he wasn't really his father's son. And that's how they'd depose him, because she was taking the side of her other son. But then
Wow.
she had second thoughts and was like, maybe I shouldn't say I cheated on my husband, who was beloved and newly dead. Maybe I shouldn't say I cheated on him and had a bastard son. So she's like, never mind.
Because she would be in trouble too, right?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, she wouldn't because her other son would be the king and he'd be like, "You're fine, mom." Like, but yeah, it's
You would
risky.
hope.
It's risky. It's a risky
Yeah.
thing to admit.
Because you would hope that your other son is in your favor. So
Right.
I don't know. Those are monarchs, you know?
The cousin and the brother had also apprehended the queen's father and brother and executed them. So this was getting serious. Like, the queen's father and brother were now dead.
Well, that's not
And
right.
her mother was arrested and accused of witchcraft.
Oh, no.
And it's unclear, but some people say she is descended from mermaids. So maybe she had magic. Word on the street, she might have been descended from mermaids. The queen's mother had been found not guilty of witchcraft. The witchcraft they accused her of is they found these two little metal figurines, like little army men, but like just two little metal figurines, and they were tied together with some wire.
So you can't have little trinkets
I mean,
back then?
to them it looks like witchcraft. Like, is this some kind of love spell that you're doing? Well, like, what are you doing with these two people who are tied in wire? Like voodoo doll kind of vibes is what they were getting.
Mm-hmm.
That's
The
the
stretch,
evidence
but
they
okay.
had to call her a witch. Meanwhile, the woman has like 15 children. Like, that just sounds like kids playing in the yard, with their
Yeah,
toys.
yeah, it's a big stretch, but okay,
Right,
sure,
right.
why not?
Well, she'd been found not guilty. They were like, let's not kill, like, the queen's father and brother already did, let's not kill her mother too. So she was not guilty. And the queen had her baby, and it was a boy, Prince Edward. So Parliament told George and Warwick, that's the brother and the cousin, to release the king. Like, this is it. We've had enough. Stop it. And so they did. And he went to a Thanksgiving Mass first, like straight to a Thanksgiving Mass, like, woo, king again. And then after that, he went to Sanctuary to get his family and meet his new son. So Mass really was the literal first thing he did before meeting his new baby.
Well, he's probably starving.
Yeah. And in between the birth of, so Prince Edward was born and Prince Richard was about to be born, but there was a little girl in between them, Princess Margaret. But she only lived to be 8 months old, so she doesn't get talked about that much just because she died when she was a baby. But then came the birth of the second son, Prince Richard. The two princes were soon joined by three younger sisters, Princess Anne,
Wow.
Princess Catherine, and Princess Bridget. And another brother, Prince George, but he only lived to be about 2. And he was named after the brother who had the king hostage when little Edward was born. So, I don't know. I mean, it's a
All's
complicated family
forgiven.
dynamic.
Yeah, all's forgiven. I'm going to name my third son after you.
Yeah, but then they executed him because he was all treasonous and it was not a good, it's a toxic family. The brother ended up getting executed
Did they execute him before or after George was born?
after. Like, they were trying to make
Oh,
nice, trying to, like,
okay,
little
okay,
George, they were, like, together, and then brother George, the older George, Uncle George of the little George, was
right.
like, this queen's a witch, because remember her mom was a witch, she's a witch too. And then the king was like, okay, well, you can't just call my wife a witch. So he got drowned in a barrel of his favorite wine, Malmsey wine. So that's what they say.
Okay, that's maybe Uncle George had a drinking problem.
Yeah. So this left the
He
king and the
wasn't.
queen with 3 older daughters, 2 princes, and 3 younger daughters. That's their family at this point.
Yeah, that's a lot. Okay.
In May 1482, the middle of the oldest daughters died at the age of just 14 from illness. So now there's 2 older daughters, 2 middle sons, and 3 younger daughters. That's the makeup of their family.
Okay.
And the very next year, after the 14-year-old princess died, her father died. He was 40.
So the king is dead.
The king is dead. Long
Oh
live
no.
the king. His oldest son, 12-year-old Prince Edward, wasn't old enough to be prince without a guardian. Or wasn't old enough to be king without a guardian. But he was the new king, 12-year-old king.
And his uncle is dead. So
His uncle George is dead. His uncle Richard is still around.
Oh, so we have an Uncle Richard. Okay.
Mm-hmm. The the king was Edward. His brothers were
Right.
George and Richard. And then the king
Okay.
had three sons, Edward, Richard, and George. So it's very complicated. There's two generations of Edward, Richard, and Georges, and both Georges died.
Okay.
So the oldest son, the 12-year-old, had been living with his mother's brother, his uncle Anthony Woodville. That's who'd been
Oh.
raising him. And his mother, the queen, had assumed that's how it would stay, even after her husband died. But at the last minute, the king changed his will
Oh no.
and changed it to be his brother Richard who was in charge of his sons, not his wife's brother Anthony. And he just said, like, my brother is more royal than your brother. Like, my brother will know how to raise him to be a king. Like, your brother is a good soldier. He's a good knight. He's a good warrior. But my brother knows how to be a king because we had that education. So he's going to be in charge of this. So how do you feel about the king changing his will at the last minute, right before he died? Like, he was on his deathbed when he changed it, I think.
I think it's kind of shady.
It is kind of shady, but those are his sons. He's maybe just thinking
Yeah, but
he's from the more royal. His wife was more from like gentry or low nobility.
I get why it's proposed that he did it, but who all witnessed the will change?
I think a lot of people did. It was official, but also he might not have been totally in his right mind. He was dying, so even just from a perspective of like fear, he might have just panicked and been like, "No, I need someone more royal to be in charge of them." It was very last minute.
Yeah, I would have.
And this is her 12-year-old son who's now the king. It's like kind of a big deal.
Right.
The queen was worried. She would rather have had her son stay with her brother. She trusted her brother. She was close with her brother. She knew her brother. She thought her brother was doing a great job.
I agree.
That would have been her choice. But it needs to be stated that unlike the king's brother George, who'd rebelled against the crown numerous times and was subsequently executed, Prince Richard had always been loyal to his brother the king in his lifetime. Always. Every
Okay.
time George had rebelled, Richard had stayed on Edward's side. So he was seen
That's good.
as trustworthy. Because of this, the king had high hopes for his son becoming the next king of England, and he died at the age of 40. So the queen was uneasy, but plans were made for Prince Regent Richard to take custody of the new young king. Because the king is dead, long live the king, and the new king is 12-year-old King Edward V. So, spoiler alert, one of the princes in the tower is actually a king, but he hasn't been crowned yet. He's just the king because his dad
Well,
died.
I kind of figured that
Yeah.
because um, why else did you kill a 12-year-old prince?
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Was the 12-year-old what was his name again?
Edward
Edward. Okay. So Prince Edward.
is
Did he
now
not
he's
get
now
the education of king first?
he did. He did some, but he's only 12, so he has
Wow.
like the basic knowledge, but he there's a lot of more information that he needs to
It
be.
said that he was being raised by his mother's uncle,
Yes.
and
Because he
he
was still young, they were training him more like a warrior, a knight, a prince. It wasn't expected that he would have to be a king at 12. So he had the basic knowledge about this would be like his military training kind of. Like, a lot of princes now they'll go away to the military and do that for a couple
Right.
years. This is what he was doing. And his dad was like, "Oh, but he needs to learn like the king stuff and my brother can help him with that." I think it was
Right.
probably always the king's idea to when his son got older, switch him over to be under Richard to learn the more complicated bits of ruling the country.
Right.
Because
I was
Richard had
just
always been with Edward, so Richard knew what Edward did as the king.
I was just like trying to figure out why you would go to Anthony instead
Yeah,
of
Anthony was a good warrior. He was in charge of the royal fleet of ships. He was a good soldier. And he
Okay.
was the queen's brother, so he was the uncle of the princes. So Prince Richard went to meet with King Edward V, the 12-year-old, and his uncle, Anthony, and they met for dinner. But the next morning, the king's uncle Anthony and the king's half-brother from the queen's first marriage were arrested. So basically all the men in the queen's family that the prince was with were all arrested.
Why?
Well, Prince Regent Richard said it was just like, just to keep things in order, and they'd be released safely soon. Like, this is nothing. We're arresting you so we can take custody of the king, and then we'll release you. It'll be fine. But
why would you have to arrest him if you have the king's will
exactly.
that says that's weird?
There was a bit of a skirmish, and there was some argument about how the queen's brother wasn't releasing the king, like they were fighting over the young king. But it's unclear because no one was really there to witness it. This is just like he said.
Okay.
So Prince Regent Richard took his nephew, King Edward V, to London and had him put in the Tower of London for his safety. That's the story. And he wasn't put in, like, the dungeon. The Tower of London at the time had really nice apartments, royal apartments. And that's where the royal family would stay for, like, safety. And that is where they would stay for safety, but it was also a prison. With, like, a royal wing, a royal tower that the royal family could utilize. And he was put in the royal tower. So he wasn't in prison. He was in a really nice tower, but it was prison. He couldn't leave. He was there for his safety. So the queen heard about this, and she had a lot of PTSD from brother-in-law trauma. And so she ran straight to sanctuary again with her remaining children, her son and her remaining 5 daughters. She ran back to sanctuary like she always had done and was like, I don't know if I can trust this guy. We'll see how this goes. And it wasn't the smooth transition that they had all hoped for. This was not going well. So if you are the queen, do you trust your brother-in-law after this incident? Or are you like, you arrested my brother, you arrested my other son, because it's the queen's other son that's not the king's son from her first marriage.
Now I'm wondering.
And you have my 12-year-old in the tower.
Yeah, but is he playing the long game? Like, he's next in line, obviously, right, Richard?
He is.
Like, if 2 boys died, it's Richard's.
Well, technically, George has a son too, but he has been disinherited, sort of, because his dad was a traitor. But yeah, if he skips all of his nephews, he's next in line. If those 2 boys die, and the other little boy was already disinherited because his father had been executed for treason. Yeah, Richard's next in line.
Sounds like Richard's playing the long game.
That's what some people think, yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. So Prince Regent Richard took this hard. He was like, why is the queen running if she has nothing to hide? Like, why is she running? Because she doesn't trust you. But yeah. He's just like, only guilty people run.
Well, and not only that, you took my kid and put him in a tower.
Mm-hmm. And she took the other heir, hit the first kid's heir, his brother, with her into sanctuary. It's like, if something happens with her son and he goes missing, well, she has the other heir. She's now got custody of the new king.
Right. Well,
they were at an awkward standoff. Neither one trusted the other one. And that is kind of where the argument starts. There are people who back Richard and people who back Queen Elizabeth. And they both say that they had every right not to trust the other one. That they were both acting shady. They were both acting guilty. And they will never agree on who is to blame for this awkward situation that's happening. An arrangement was agreed to. Prince Richard said that Queen Elizabeth needed to hand over her other son, the younger Prince Richard, to keep his brother company in the tower, partially. And as a show of good faith, that she was willing to work with Richard. Like, look, give me your other son. We'll put him in the tower with his brother. They can hang out until the coronation. You'll see that I can be trusted. I'll see that I can trust you. We'll be one happy family again.
No.
Well, here's where things start to get a little fuzzy. Reports say that the queen did hand over a male child, aged 9 to 10, who was reporting to be Prince Richard. But there is a persistent rumor that she replaced her son with a body double, a peasant boy, and sent her son into hiding because she was like, fuck no, I'm not handing you over to creepy Uncle Richard, who's got your brother in jail, basically. So a boy was delivered to Richard. A boy that they say was Prince Richard. But a lot of people think it maybe wasn't actually him. So 2 boys were in the Tower of London now. Their mother and sisters were still safely tucked away in Sanctuary because they weren't leaving Sanctuary. They were like, absolutely not. This is not a safe situation. And for regular people living in Sanctuary, it would be similar to dungeon living. It wasn't great, but it was worth it if you thought your life was in danger.
Right.
The queen and her family were loaned a modest house on the property because they were like, we can't stick the queen and the princesses in with all these criminals in the dungeon. That's crazy. So they got a modest house. It was little. It wasn't a palace or anything, but they weren't in the cells for the sanctuary. And Prince Regent Richard kept assuring the queen that he was moving forward with coronation plans for the young king. He was planning the coronation. By all reports, it seemed like he was planning the coronation for the boy. But then something happened kind of suddenly. Prince Regent Richard changed his mind. And there are various schools of thought of why he did this. The supporters of the queen assumed that this had been a plan all along, like you said. This was his long plan. This is what he wanted to do all along. And now that he had possession of both male heirs, he had all of the power. And they thought the queen's good nature had been taken advantage of. But the supporters of Prince Regent Richard would say that the queen was acting shady because she had something to hide. And Richard had no choice but to change his mind because new facts came to light. And the new facts were that word on the street was the king had married someone else before this queen and then changed his mind when he met this queen and just got with this queen. So Prince Regent Richard was saying these children were illegitimate because his brother had married someone else before he married the queen. But the king had always said, this is my wife, these are my children. Always.
This is my heir.
Mm-hmm. So both princes were declared illegitimate. And all their sisters, too. Like all the royal children.
I have a question.
Yes.
How did our king die?
Which king?
Our original king.
Oh, King Edward IV. He got sick after Easter.
So they don't know why he...
Not really, no. There was a big Easter feast and then he got sick.
So he could have been poisoned.
He could have. There's not a lot of talk about him being poisoned. People kind of think he just died from an excess. He was kind of King Henry VIII-ish. It's King Henry VIII's grandfather. And he's very much like King Henry VIII in that he would overeat and sleep around a lot and not get enough sleep. And like he didn't really take care of himself. So he was physically going downhill for a little while before this. But
okay,
he's very King Henry-like.
So there's multiple reasons he could have died.
Yes.
It wasn't like he was in his prime health and he also was dead.
Yeah. So Parliament agreed. Richard couldn't just have them declared illegitimate. He needed Parliament to back them and be like, this is why my nephews are not legitimate. And Parliament agreed. And we don't know why they agreed. Like, maybe there were payoffs. Maybe there were deals. Maybe they legitimately were like, yeah, this is not a legitimate child of the king. For whatever reason, maybe they just didn't want a 12-year-old king, and 30-year-old Prince Regent Richard was maybe a little better looking to them as an option for a king.
But here's the thing. Richard would have still had power regardless of if he was king or...
He would have, yeah. For 3 years, until his nephew hit 15. Because at 15... then his nephew was old enough to be king, which is crazy to me that 15's old enough to be king. But yes, for 3 years, Richard would have been in charge. But if he agrees to have this prince coronated, then he's agreeing that his job will last 3 years and then he will be done. And he'll keep working with the king if the king wants him to, but once the king turns 15, it's up to him.
Yeah, but in 3 years, you can brainwash a 12-year-old very easily.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Parliament went along with it. They all of the royal children, all of remaining 7 royal children, were declared illegitimate by Parliament and their uncle.
Oh, okay.
And Prince Regent Richard became King Richard III. And his nephews stayed in the Tower of London. He didn't release them either. He declared them illegitimate and kept them in the tower.
Why would you do that?
Well, because they had supporters. Like, not everybody was happy with this. So he didn't want to let them out and then have them be able to raise an army and then take over. And
But what 12-year-old would raise an army?
the 12-year-old wouldn't, but the 12-year-old's mother might. She had
I
enough
don't.
power that she could talk people into backing him, probably.
Yeah, but she's at
She's
the
still in
abbey.
sanctuary. Like, he's
Yeah.
definitely... Richard's got all the power. He's being very, like, Machiavellian and just trying to, like, cut off every threat that he sees, so he just has a smooth ride in.
And we know that the princes are still alive at this point in time?
Yes.
Okay. So people are seeing them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. During this period, Mancini records that Edward, Prince Edward, the 12-year-old, was regularly visited by a doctor who reported that Edward, like a victim prepared for sacrifice, sought remissions for his sin by daily confession and penance because he believed death was facing him. So the 12-year-old was like,
Holy
I'm
cow!
definitely going to die. So let's prepare me for death because this is what's going to happen.
How
And
does
people
he.
would say they saw him like staring out the window and that he just looked sad.
Well, yeah, he's stuck in a tower.
Yeah.
Not like he can do anything. It's not like he's being educated,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. There's no adults that are taking care of him.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
He's in jail with
Scared.
his maybe brother, maybe a peasant boy that just showed up and said, I'm your brother, wink, wink. And then told him later, like, your mom hid your brother. Like, you just have to meet. So he might be with his brother. He might be with a stranger who's pretending to be his brother.
Right, but still, it's another child. It's not
Yeah.
an
Well, and
adult.
if another child showed up pretending to be his brother, that would be reason for him to be worried too. That would be reason for him to be like, "Oh, I'm not safe." Like they wouldn't even send my other brother here. That could be why he thought death was facing him, which just kind of leans into the queen didn't send her real son.
Yeah, but here's the thing: what 12-year-old thinks about dying?
This one definitely did.
That's,
They
I
said
mean,
that
at
was
12,
his main focus in prison during this time, was that he was worried that his death was imminent. Thanks for joining us for the free preview of The Princes in the Tower. Join us for the conclusion over on Patreon. The link is in the show description.
Will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.